Please hold the line. We will answer your call as soon as possible.
I'm Michael Schneider, founder and CEO of Service. In this episode of Please Hold, I'm talking to Mehul Patel, who is the CEO of Hired.com, a platform for hiring incredible talent in engineering and marketing and many other types. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
In case you can't tell, it's a beautiful summer day here in Monterey, California.
Summer in Northern California, yeah.
And reminds me of that Mark Twain quote, the greatest summer ever, or the coldest winter ever.
The coldest summer ever. The coldest winter ever.
Coldest winter ever was the summer in San Francisco. We're just south of San Francisco, and this is what you get. So, I wanted to talk to you first about your kind of path to the startup world, because it's kind of unique. You went to law school.
I did.
And you majored in econ at Brown for your undergrad, and then you went to law school at the University of Virginia, and then you practiced law, is that right?
I did.
For a few years. So would you say you're kind of a recovering attorney?
I'm a recovering lawyer, so the joke in lawyers is that you've either got people who tunneled out or people who are trying to figure out how to tunnel out. I figured out how to tunnel out, but it took me 5 years of practice. I went to law school wanting to kind of do good things, ended up with law school debt, and went and joined a big law firm. But my compromise was I was going to join a big law firm in Silicon Valley where I could work with small companies at least. So I joined a firm, Cooley, that's in the Valley, did venture capital and IPOs and M&A. It was a fun time because it was the mid-90s, Netscape just went public, and so the whole first IPO boom happened. But I did 5 years of that at Cooley, and then a company, PeopleSoft, that got acquired by Oracle, and ultimately decided to move over to the business side.
Was there a day where you're just like, I just can't take this anymore? Or was it more gradual and the other side just seemed more interesting?
Yeah, it was more the latter, actually. I felt like, so I did a summer in New York practicing on Wall Street, and that was every day. I was like, this is the worst. You were number 26 on a deal, working till 3 a.m.
Why do people do it? Is the potential money when you get to the top just so great that people...
Yeah, I think the potential money's really good. I think it makes every parent and grandparent happy, and so you sort of end up, I think a lot of people just end up in it, but the work for many years is miserable. But working at a firm where you work with startups is great, actually. But what was great about it was the stuff the startups are doing, the stuff that you're doing, and the stuff that I'm doing now, and so I wanted to hop the fence.
Do you feel like law school helped prepare you for the startup world, or are you using skills you acquired there?
Yeah, I actually really think so. I thought about doing an MBA and ended up doing law school. But it teaches you to be very disciplined about your thinking. You actually think a lot like an engineer, sort of very logical, kind of linear thinking. You'll get good at taking sort of a lot of data and distilling down to like what's really important. So I actually feel like law school is a good training, surprisingly.
So you have you've done a lot of different things in different companies, but Hired is your first position as a CEO.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So what's the story there? How did you meet the founders? And you came on very early on in the company's life cycle. Yeah. Usually one of the founders is the CEO, and then a few years in, they turn it over, but they had just almost started when they brought you on.
Yeah, well, I didn't come on as CEO, I came on as COO, but the plan was always to make me CEO. So that happened 2 years in, so a year and a half ago.
How did you meet the founders?
Yeah, so the way I met the founders is actually a funny story. I was an EIR at Crosslink, who ended up doing our Series A. And my first day on the job, one of the partners, Eric, who you know actually, was meant to be moderating a panel, and he couldn't make it. So they were like, Mehul, you should just go do the panel. And so I moderated this panel, which is about scaling marketplaces, and that's why I was doing the EIR thing for Crosslink, was marketplaces. And so I moderated the panel, and on the panel is Matt Miskowicz, who founded 99 Designs, and Doug Fierstein, who founded LiveOps. And in the audience was Alan Grant, and he knew Matt because Alan had hacked 99 Designs. So Matt had sent him a cease and desist letter. But on the side, Matt...
It's a very Silicon Valley story, one way to meet someone.
Yeah, very Silicon Valley. But Matt had sent him a note on the side saying, hey, I hate that you hacked us, but it was kind of an awesome hack. And they became friends. Wow. And so the conversation after that for the three of them was like, how do you scale a company? And the biggest challenge is finding talent. And that's a universal challenge for companies, actually, not just startups. And the view was like, boy, all the alternatives are really painful for finding great talent. Is there a better way to do it? They actually reached out to me a couple weeks later to come and join. And at that point, I just started the EIR thing, and I was sort of grooved in that, and I passed. But 6 months later, they came back. We got talking. So I ended up joining the company, as you said, really 4 or 5 months after its founding, just a couple months after it started.
So they wanted an external CEO very early on.
Yeah, they knew. I mean, because of the weird circumstances of us kind of meeting, which was, Doug had flown in from Florida, Matt lives in Canada, Alan is here in San Francisco. They knew that they were going to need a scaling CEO, and they knew that early. And so they actually sort of asked around, and my name came up. They were like, "Oh, we know that guy." And so, and the plan was bring me in as COO, president. Make sure that I'm sort of, and acting like a founder and thinking like a founder, so you don't have that issue where, CEO comes in 3 years later from afar, doesn't understand the culture. And so it was a very natural switch a year and a half ago to make me CEO.
Okay. It's your first gig as CEO. Did anything surprise you? Were you ready for it, given all of your prior experience?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're ever fully ready for it. But I was essentially acting as CEO on the ground, and from day one, Matt was CEO, but he was in Vancouver, so we were sort of teaming up. I think the thing I'd say about it is, we were talking about it today at a panel, but it's a lonely job. You're managing a lot of people's expectations, and you're constantly, you're constantly sort of figuring out what people's anxieties and motivations are, making sure you're addressing them, whether it's employees, whether it's the board, whether it's investors that are not on the board, whether it's the press. And so it's sort of this sort of lonely job. I also find that you suddenly find as your CEO, people very much are very conscious of how they communicate with you. And interesting, as COO, there was no filters, and I got the real view. Yeah. As CEO, I get the filtered view, and I really have to search around to get the true view of everything.
Yeah, I actually, that's my least favorite thing about the job. All I want is honest information from the people around me, and for some reason, I don't think I'm a scary tyrant in the office, but people, just because you're the CEO,
it's the role,
are protective over what they tell you.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips to break through that? Like, have you managed to coax honesty out of your people all the time?
I mean, we've tried to create, I think you and I have talked about this, like a really transparent, open culture from the beginning. And so, I think one is just the tone we set around values and how we kind of talk transparently, and so you hope that comes back, even with that sort of CEO kind of fear that people have. The second thing I've started doing, actually, as particularly, we're at 250 people now in 17 markets globally.
Wow, not too much gray hair.
Yeah, there's much more of it than there was a year ago. I'm doing one-on-ones with 5 to 7 team members, starting at the most junior levels, every week now. Just half an hour, for them to get to know me, kind of personally, be able to share stuff, start to form relationships as best you can in a 250-person company, so to get over that. Because I actually think, the CEO only has 3 jobs. I'm interested in your view on this. Sort of 1 is raise money, 2 is hire great people, and then 3 is keep the great people productive and happy, right? Retain them. And if you look at number 3, that's really about communication and openness, and so I'm trying to spend more of my time there now.
Yeah. Well, your website has helped me with number 3. Well, keeping it is my problem, retaining them, but finding them, Hired's been a great resource for us.
Yeah, thank you for being a client.
You're part of that solution.
And you're giving great product feedback too, which is great.
So I read in an interview a few months ago with Forbes, you were talking about tech workers that were relocating away from the Bay Area and the Valley due to the cost of living. I'm curious if you think that trend continues. Is the cost of living in San Francisco, which is a topic that's been talked about so many times, is it a long-term threat to the viability of the ecosystem, or do companies just keep raising more money and paying employees more, and it just is a self-fulfilling cycle?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a long-term threat. I'd say it's a challenge. I think what will happen is you're always going to get people who want to, settle down, have families, and can't afford the Bay Area. I mean, and the thing about the Bay Area is it's not just you leave San Francisco and you can find a nice home in the suburbs. You have to go an hour and a half out to find even a semi-affordable house, so that's by Northern California standards. So people are leaving. And the reality is that even, what the data showed was that even though San Francisco is the highest headline salary, if you factor in kind of cost of living, there are 7 other markets, major markets, that are much more cost effective. So one, I do think you're going to have some candidates leave. I think, but number 2, I think the reason people are drawn to San Francisco is it's the nexus of entrepreneurship, right? You've got capital, you've got talent, you've got an ecosystem that sort of celebrates risk and failures on sort of looked down upon. Those kinds of things won't change the Bay Area being the draw. So I mean, almost the hypothesis out of the study we created was people will come to the Bay Area to get that experience, meet those networks and companies, and there's going to be a smaller percentage of them, but a percentage nonetheless, that when they get to a certain life stage may decide, you know what, I'd go to Southern California, I'll go to Seattle, I'll go to Austin, but they'll start in the Bay Area still.
You guys actually have a unique perspective with your system on that. Are you seeing more engineering talent being hired in markets outside of the Valley?
We are. So we're a recruiting marketplace. We pick the top 5 to 10% of talent. They come on the platform. Companies then essentially apply to them. So we get a real view as to sort of which companies are applying to candidates and where candidates are accepting interviews and where they're going to work. We see typically 20 to 25% of candidates relocate to another market, and that's heaviest out of San Francisco. And so, the
trend increasing?
The trend has been increasing, but just by a little bit. I suspect in the last year and a half, as the funding environment slowed down here, opportunities elsewhere are more attractive because now you're not getting that same kind of crazy valuation stuff, keeping people here because their equity is worth what they think is a lot more.
So you guys are the first system I've seen where the auction it's the company are basically applying to the potential employee and not the other way around.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm curious your take. I mean, employees must love it because it's almost like a bidding war. I mean, I know that candidates don't always go. It's not just about the money. Yeah. But often I would guess they use Hired to get a nice bump in their salary. Have you had any pushback from employers on that system? And do you think that your platform is actually contributing to higher salaries in tech?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, look, we started the marketplace thinking that the very best talent's always in demand, and there's no good way for the very best talent to get the best opportunities. Comp is one critical part of the best opportunities, but not everything. But when we built the platform, it was definitely about companies essentially giving an interview request that's transparent to a candidate. I think our sort of idea there was that candidates need to know their market worth. The reality is that companies sometimes don't like that when they first hear about it. But when we tell them that, like, look, you're competing for this talent in the marketplace anyway, I think they accept the reality of a competitive market for the best talent. Whether we're actually raising the salaries, so far, 2 things. 80+% of our candidates don't take the highest offer on the platform, which sort of makes sense, right? Taking a job is not a transaction, it's a life choice for a significant period of time. And then the second is average compensation on platform stayed flat in the 4 years we've been around. So I think compensation in general isn't being driven up by us, but we're making it transparent.
I don't know if you can share this stat, but I think you give the employer, was it 4 minutes to edit their offer?
That's right.
Why do you do that, and how often is it edited up or down?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do it because we don't want employers, when they see other interview requests, to suddenly feel like, gosh, mine is much lower. Mm-hmm. We want to give them the opportunity.
Or much higher.
Or much higher. Yeah. Though usually, actually, they're revised up, not down. Because I think people who are putting in higher see the talent, they see the candidate, and they're great. I'm paying more. There's a higher chance maybe the candidate will pay attention. What's interesting though is that when the compensation is raised, it's usually higher to get higher. But most of the time, the change that's made is not about compensation. It's about the note that's written to the candidate. So the way this plays out is service is looking at a candidate. You see that your compensation that you're offering to that candidate is lower than others. You're going to go back and write more in your personal note saying, I know our comp may not be what other companies are offering, but here's why this is such an amazing opportunity. You say you want to do, and people sort of personalize their outreach a lot more to make it more
within
effective.
4 minutes. They got to type fast.
Well, you have to start it within 4 minutes. Okay. So yeah.
Got it. So who's your customer? Or do you have 2 customers? Is it the employee? Is it the employer? And how do you see that sort of mediation between the 2? Yeah,
it's an excellent question. So we have 2 customers, 2-sided marketplace. One side we have talent, candidates. The other side, we have companies we have 6,000 companies on the platform, ranging from early stage startups to big Fortune 10 companies. So both are our customers. The mediation between the two, our North Star has been do the right thing for candidates. If you do the right things for candidates, especially the best candidates, they're going to come back to you. They're going to tell their friends about you. We measure Net Promoter Score. We talk a lot about wow experience. And if you do that, you serve the clients who want to get an on-demand talent pipeline. So, when we mediate, we're always going to go candidate side.
Okay. Do you guys have to get involved in a lot of deals, or is it pretty much self-serve between the employer and the employee?
We do get involved in deals. It depends. So the clients that know how to use us, like service, don't need us very much. And we have a talent advocate that works with a candidate and an account manager that works with a client. But at the beginning, yeah, we help. And the reality is the candidates we're picking out of the top 5 or 7%, they're in high demand. So if a company gets in its own way about taking too long to get back to a candidate, they're not going to be able to hire the candidate. And so we help make sure that things are moving along.
Tell me about the filtering process you guys use. How do you pick the top 5 to 7%?
Yeah, so we started out doing it completely manually. We actually had 2 people, both out of Harvard admissions because they were good at pattern recognition. And it was all done manually. Now at the scale we're at, 30...
Better or worse rate than Harvard, 5 to 7%?
I think it's about on par with Harvard.
Okay.
But now we have 30,000 applications a month. So we obviously can't do that with people. And so what we do is we only have 2.5 people right now doing it. But because most of it's
you have 2.5 people for 30,000 applications?
Most of it's done algorithmically now.
Okay.
So we got the data. Once those 2 people were picking people from manual decisions, putting them into the marketplace, and we'd see how well they did in the marketplace. And if Michael did really well in the marketplace, we're like, what were the characteristics of Michael that mapped to Anne that let us go out and curate the right people? So now 70% of our candidates are auto-curated, meaning we look at them just like a FICO score. We figure out if they're a good fit, and they get auto put on, and then the 2.5 folks are looking at the other 30%. And ultimately, I think we believe a lot in this sort of wow service philosophy. We think it'll never be fully automated. There's got to be human judgment in this, but there'll be a lot of it that's automated. So we think the right mix is probably like 90% automated, 10% manual.
Do you put them through code tests?
When we can't get signal, we'll suggest do you want to take a third-party coding challenge so we can make a decision on you? And Codility will do that. They'll do a test for us on it.
And it's a machine learning system, so it's getting smarter all the time?
Exactly. That's exactly right. So we know who's successful on the platform and why. Now we can be better at if Michael's been successful, targeting the next Michael in our marketing, auto-curating Michael onto the next Michael onto the platform. If Michael did well with service, Mehul has the same characteristics as Michael, then Mehul should see service. Yep. If Mehul liked hired, Michael should like hired because we're similar. So all of that matching is driven off data science. Yep. So we have a big data science team, 15 patents. The data operation at its heart.
So you guys have expanded pretty aggressively globally. You recently acquired 3 startups in Australia, Paris, and also California. Mm-hmm. And you, I think, are now open in Singapore as well. Yep. What is your view on acquiring versus partnering versus starting from scratch? And how do you guys make those decisions?
Yeah. So we started with a philosophy that we wanted to build everywhere we went because customer service and brand and NPS is so critical for what we're doing because of the relationship we want to build with candidates especially, but also clients. So that's been our defining philosophy. The exceptions to that rule where we've acquired in Australia and in France have been teams that were actually people we would have hired to run the business for them. So we didn't buy them because of their going concern business. They were actually both very early stage.
More of an acqui-hire?
Essentially, they were acqui-hires. But the lens I asked our team to use was like, would this be the team we'd hire on the ground? Yeah. So that's how we've done it. The California acquisition was really it was an asset acquisition, patents around machine learning.
So you were managing director in Asia for Axiom, and I saw that you went to, is it Dulwich College or Dulwich?
Dulwich.
Where is that, by the way?
That's in London.
Okay. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the UK. So I was born in Africa, actually, in Kenya, and then moved when I was 3 to the UK with my family, obviously. Grew up there, did all my high school there, and then came out to the States for college.
Okay. So that's where your accent comes from?
Comes in and out, yeah. People think I'm South African, yeah.
So, when did you leave the UK? At what age?
18, college, yeah.
Any desire to go back?
I love London, but I also just love being in Northern California. California in general, I like Southern California too. I think the spirit of entrepreneurship here is like really exciting. So I think at some point in time I'll go back. My family's there, but really loving living in the States.
Could you build Hired as quickly and efficiently in the UK or any other country compared to the US?
I think it's getting quicker. Certainly London, certainly New York, certainly
Post-Brexit London too?
Post-Brexit is different. Post-Brexit is going to be challenging. We've written a study on that called Mind the Gap, which I'll send you. But essentially the thesis of that, just to go down a little avenue here, the thesis of that is the UK is declining computer science enrollment. The salaries are much less than the States for engineers, and a third of their engineers were coming from the EU. So Brexit really puts them in a supply-demand constraint. That being said, in terms of starting a company, I think there's nowhere quicker than the Bay Area. So the capital's here, just the ecosystem's here. But London and New York are getting there much faster than I would have thought, actually, 10 years ago.
Yeah. What about outside the UK? I mean, do you think that there's been a lot of comparisons saying that there's really nothing like California, and if you go outside of California, there's nothing like the US for starting a tech company.
Yeah.
Outside of the US and the UK, do you think there's another market? Singapore is a very open market.
Singapore's been a great market. I mean, look, Melbourne and Sydney have been doing great. The Melbourne government is really pushing entrepreneurship. They're blowing through their goals. In fact, Melbourne and Sydney are growing faster than any office we've had grow for the right stage, or the same stage. Tel Aviv is another great market. Berlin, Paris is doing great. So we're actually seeing these pockets all over the place, and none of them are the scale of London, New York, San Francisco, and I'd say Southern California now too, Santa Monica. But they're getting there. They're getting there faster. So.
When did you figure out that this was a passion for you? I mean, other than just building a company, you could build any company.
Yeah.
Why this company? Why?
Right.
Is it helping people get jobs? Is it fulfilling an inefficiency that companies are dealing with? What really drives you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I came out of professional services as a lawyer, and I've spent a lot of time doing kind of future of work stuff, right? So how work should be. And so I was at a company called Axiom that really helped lawyers leave law firms where they were miserable, but still be able to earn a living as independent contractors. And we sort of placed them into companies essentially.
By the way, as a side, do you know any happy lawyers?
There are very few happy lawyers. Yeah, I think partners can be happy. I think financially, but it's a tough road. I think certainly people who do public defense and that kind of stuff, they're happy. But I'm talking about corporate law. It's tough.
So you were at Axiom.
So there's Axiom, helping lawyers kind of be empowered to get out of law firms and work for themselves and gain more of the upside. And so I've always been interested in the future of work. I mean, I did, when I was in EIR at Crosslink, I focused on services marketplaces. I did a lot of work with Lyft, and I was working with Kaggle, all marketplaces of different sort for labor. And so this has always been a passion for me. And the idea really is that work is such a meaningful part of our lives. We both have families, but we spend as much time away from them as we do with them, but we do it because of work and our passion there. And it seemed really broken that we couldn't get the right people into the right opportunities when it's such an important part of our lives.
So you've been hired for 3 years now, is that right? If you could go back 3 years and tell yourself one thing, what would you say? And do you have just any general advice for people that are a first-time CEO?
I'd say scaling is hard, and we spend a lot of time thinking about scaling, culture and values. It's still very different to stay connected to your organization at 250 versus 15. And even though we planned for it, it's been harder. And I guess the thing I'd knock myself on the last year and a half is I haven't been as accessible to the team as I should have been, which is why now I'm sort of clearing the decks to spend time, because what starts happening is you have people that you don't know very well who now hire people, and you meet them maybe one time in orientation and see them again. You've got to build those relationships early, and that takes a lot of work and a lot of time as you get big. The other thing I'd say, just from a business perspective, is that we never built a sales team. We just did it 3 months ago. And the reason was we had 1,000 companies a month signing up.
3 months ago. So prior to that, it was all organic growth?
It was all organic, all inbound growth.
6,000 companies?
6,000. We have 1,000 companies a month to this day, even before the sales team signing up on their own. We curate them and pick the top 100, 150. We make sure they're funded, make sure they're in the right geography, make sure they have the right skill set. We don't take consulting firms right now. And so...
But wait, we got to talk about this more because that's incredible. So approximately 6,000 companies signed up for Hired with no sales team, all inbound.
All inbound. The only outbound we did was we would have teams on the ground, and there'd be an account manager and a talent advocate, and the account manager would go to conferences and he might meet you there and say, tell you about it. But there was no SDR team, we didn't use Salesforce as a CRM. So just in the last 3 months we've started doing that.
That's very hard to do.
Yeah.
I mean, not many companies get to 6,000 customers with no sales team.
Yeah, so look, we're solving an acute problem. And it was so acute that companies were finding us, which is part of our thesis, to get the right candidates and companies will find you. But I think what we're doing now is saying, hey, look, if we really want to keep growing the way we want to grow and access the public markets, we need to have an intentional sales strategy. So we're now this late into our company building a sales mindset and a sales team, and that's a challenge I think few CEOs deal with, because you usually start with both.
Yeah, it's still impressive you've been able to get to that. With no sales team.
Because we're solving a problem. I mean, you get the problem we're solving. I think people fundamentally understand this problem, getting great talent quickly.
So we spent time today talking about when employees aren't able to scale with the company in terms of skill set and they just kind of top out. What about CEOs? I mean, you've built this up to 250 people. Could you run a 5,000 person company, a 25,000 person company?
I mean, look, I think ultimately everyone has a sweet spot where they can play strongly, and then, early employees and early CEOs are going to be great, in the 0 to 1 or the 1 to 20, but the 20 to 100, using the sort of speed limit thing here, that might be an entirely different CEO. And I think that's. I mean, ultimately, you want to do the right thing for shareholders, and you need to know where you're capable and where you're not, which is why I'm very impressed by founders who found a company and are running a massive public company, because that skill set is so fundamentally different. Yeah. Very few can do it.
Yeah, guys like Mark Benioff or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, although you could argue his wilderness period helped him do that.
Yes, exactly. Zuckerberg. I mean, there's a couple of them. Yeah. Visionary companies with strong founders, but very difficult to Bezos. Very difficult to do. So I think there'll be a time when I'll be like, this isn't the right thing for me or the shareholders. And we'll figure out when that is, because I'm a first-time CEO, so I'm figuring it out day by day.
You're still having fun, so probably no time soon.
Yeah.
So my last question is just about scale. Where do you guys go from here? You're at 250 people, but still in the grand scheme of the employment market, you're still small.
We're tiny.
You're tiny.
We're tiny. So, we have a 5-year plan to get to $1 billion in revenue. If we did $1 billion in revenue, we would be the 9th biggest recruiting company in the world. That just shows you how big that market is.
Who's number one?
Randstad. So it's a massive market. That would be less than 0.5% of our addressable market. So we think this can be big. We grow in 3 ways when you ask about scale. One is we add markets. We have 100 markets mapped out globally that we could be in. The second way is we add job categories. So we started with tech talent, we added salespeople and marketers, but we should be able to do this for nurses and accountants and finance people. And then the third way is, within each job category, different levels of work. So we do full-time hires. You probably know we do contractors now too. We want to add new grads too and get folks coming out of school with their first job.
How did you get Hired.com?
Yeah, it's funny, and you've gone through this, I'm sure. When you're looking for a domain name, you look at so many, and the one you pick seems so obvious after the fact. And we actually struggled with whether Hired was right. It wasn't actually that hard for us to get Hired. It was owned, and it was sold to us for, very low six figures. Wow. Surprisingly low. And it's so obviously the right name for us, but we were entertaining names like Saffron and Needle was another name.
Nobody says what they do. I mean, I would argue Service is a very rare one as well, and Service.com was too expensive for us, unfortunately. Yeah. But people either misspell a common word or just brand a word like saffron. So
yes, exactly. And so we were down that road, and then we were just like, Hired makes so much sense. And the ambition, we were, as you know, probably know, we were developer auction when we first started. Yeah. And so that was the rebrand, and Hired was just such bigger ambition than just developers and sounding like it was just about startups.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Did you like what you just saw? You want to see more? Go ahead and subscribe. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And if there's someone you want to see on the show, just add them as a comment down below. We'll take a look and we'll have them on if we can. Thanks again.